we can play a fantastic role in creating systems in which users demand that the systems themselves be trustworthy. So I'll step back for a second and say there are two problems here that I think we can address as designers. One is that humans tend to overtrust these systems immediately. We tend to give these autonomous systems a lot of authority, and often that's because the systems themselves are fairly invisible. But you can also think of an example like somebody following a GPS system into a lake, or someone's taste being affected by recommendation systems, letting those systems kind of sway what they like and they don't like. So on one hand, we overtrust these systems. Another example would be an AI interviewing you for a job. If you get the job, you don't question whether or not the AI system was biased and what the issues. You're just like, great, this is a great system. I got the job, right? So on one hand, people tend to overtrust these systems, but on another hand, if we disagree with the predictions, right? If we disagree with the AI system, then trust falls away very quickly, because in most situations today, we have no recourse. We can't question the system. So back to the AI interview example, if you don't get the job and you're being screened by an AI, you seldom have much recourse to understand why you didn't get the job, or what factors were at play, what could you do differently in the future. So we're not building interfaces as a rule that encourage people to question these systems. So I think that designers right now need to be designing systems that encourage people to be skeptical of these systems, but also give them avenues of recourse when they disagree with the systems. Mm-hmm. And if we can do that, then we can enable people to talk back to the systems, right? And that's how we protect people's digital rights, or that's how we support digital rights in humans.
How do we, is there a methodology that you would say that designers need to apply in building these out? Do you have any guide or reference there?
So I am a huge fan of the AI Bill of Rights that the White House put out, the US White House put out a year ago. It is a fantastic document that is all about protecting the rights of the digital rights of citizens, right, in ways that preserve democratic values, et cetera. The whole thing to me reads like a kind of design brief. There are 5 main areas, and each of the areas, we designers, it's very well done. And there's just speaking about different areas in which we need to preserve rights. And as designers, we can think about, okay, how do we design interfaces or systems that do these things? So I'm not sure if that's answering your question directly, but I think that document is a wonderful starting point for beginning to think about the topics that we need to address as designers. So for example, okay, one of the topics is notice and explanation. That's the way they put it. And that topic, that's a particularly great topic because it talks about things like giving people options in the moment of use. So this is something as designers we can think about a lot, right? We can't, if we ask people to protect themselves up front for these sorts of questionnaires or giving away of various rights or preserving rights, then people just tend to skip through them because they don't understand the impact of what they are responding to. But if we give people choices in the moment of use, then it's actually at a moment in which someone can understand what's being asked of them and thoughtfully respond. And that's an interface challenge, right? Those are things we design into the interfaces that we create in order for people to respond to these systems. So I think there's so much we can be doing in those spaces.
I think it's fascinating you're jumping to government, right? Because this idea of regulatory frameworks is really strong in certain industries, and it sometimes is a slap in the face of designers to say, like, you have to follow a rule, a guideline. There's certain methodologies you have to do to adhere to basically the rigorous regulatory framework, especially in financial services, medtech, life science. how do you adhere to these, especially in the age of AI, and still be able as a designer to create intuitive, proactive interactions that enhance user experiences?
Well, that's a complex question. There are various things we can do. We can think about things like designing for the edge. So designing systems in which processing is happening at the edge on personal devices. So we're not putting as much data into the cloud. We can think about things like designing systems that don't just scoop up big giant buckets of data that we don't need in order for the systems to operate. We can think about designing systems in which we're only gathering the data which we're actually able to protect, right, and secure, which has not been the case in recent decades. So there are a lot of more kind of back-end ways we can be thinking about that. And I think that as designers, we do need to educate ourselves to some degree, in a big picture way, about some of those back-end methods. Because if we are designing systems that are collecting data, we have to be responsible for the data that they collect. We can't just watch that.
I want to jump ahead of data, but also it's fascinating, right? Because as designers, we have to be much smarter about backend systems in the future than we've ever been. And I would say at the same time, data is really becoming, a human representation of needs, right? So as you're developing, systems that leverage a lot of data and display a lot of data and make decisions based on that data, it becomes very important for the designer to understand how that data works, how the data is displayed, how the data is narrated, and what the regulatory boundaries for that data is, which is a tall order for somebody coming out of UX school or boot camp to get up to speed on all these things. So as you as an educator, I want to jump ahead and maybe ask that question following, but really before we do that, can you elaborate on the place of human-centered thinking in the context of that data innovation?
Well, the short answer is, as long as humans are using those systems, we need designers to think about the humans using those systems, right? To think about it from a human perspective. That's the short answer.
Right.
The longer answer is that data scientists, developers, they are trained to create optimal systems that function well, and they're trained to think about how to do all kinds of innovative things with data and to design systems that use data effectively. And those are fantastic, very important things. But we also need to come from the perspective of, okay, but how do those systems actually benefit people, and what experience are the people having with those systems? They may be amazing, right? They're optimal, elegant, function to the T, but if they're not actually benefiting people, then they're not uplifting society, right? So we need the, now if the humans are out of the equation, right? If I don't know, if we're no longer a part of the equation, no longer using these systems, I'm going like, we no longer exist or whatever, maybe we won't need the humans, the designers anymore. But as long as we humans are around, they're going to need designers to design those experiences between the human and the machine.
And I think there's another aspect of this is basically, as humans are interacting with AI systems that are leveraging a lot of their data, they need to also be incentivized in doing so by saying, what's coming, what's for me? Like, if I give you all these things, what do I get out of this? And I think that's where the human side of data is really becoming pretty strong, because then you say, well, you're giving me your age and your weight because I can predict a better health outcome, X, Y, Z, right? So I think it's also critical to understand in the context of human interfaces what the objectives are of the interfacee in the context of that system, right? Not only how do we monetize a business value proposition.
Right. I completely agree with that. And that goes back to giving people the ability to ask that question. Why?
Right.
Why do you need my age? Why do you need what are you doing with it?
Right. Or basically incentivizing them, saying, look, all the cool stuff we can do with your age. You know,
Yeah.
follow us. Right. Yeah. I think that's where I feel like the fascinating part is for user interface designers is to use data in the context of a better user experience.
I agree. And that's what designers are very good at, right? We're good at prototyping futures, positive, possible futures. And that vision is very needed right now.
Right. Agreed. Yeah, your book is really fascinating because it covers kind of both sides, right? Like how designers create systems, but also how systems create, interfaces. I shared an example with you for like there's more and more tools that are replacing conventional UX creation. These tools are rapidly evolving, right? On the one hand, these tools are going to disrupt the traditional UX creation process. On the other hand, machine learning will be at front and center of the future of UX development. How does UX and design education have to evolve as AI systems are replacing, on one hand, conventional UX methodologies? On the other hand, also, what's the rule for UX designers without a computer science degree in the land of large language models and really, very deep dives, as you said, into data, understanding the back end of data and all these things?
So first, I would say that we are responsible as educators for teaching our students and getting them excited about the capabilities of AI. You don't need a computer science degree to understand basic algorithmic capabilities of machine learning systems, right? So on one hand, yes, designers, and they need to be able to use machine learning as a kind of design material. It's very important. They do need to have more of an understanding of data than designers have in the past. Like, for example, I'm at a big research university. Our students, a data science minor and certificate have just been approved for our design degree, which is graphic experience design, that kind of overlaps with our discipline, that makes it very easy for the students to get into data. And we'll be encouraging our students to either minor or get a certificate as they move through our undergrad and our grad system. So there's that as well, right? Just a basic educational need. But then going back to the first part of your question, when you talked about tools and how these tools are going to kind of, I think that gets to a question right now about automating sort of away what we're doing, which I find, so we won't be doing the same thing in 20 years. We might not even be doing the same kinds of things in 10 years. But then we're not doing the same things we were doing 20 years ago anyway, right? So I look back to like the 70s. I was not a designer in the 70s. I'm not that old. I'll just print that out. But in the 70s, just wanted to make that clear. But in the 70s, designers were not, or specifically graphic designers, were not thinking about designing interfaces. They weren't thinking about designing the software applications or websites. And they weren't being trained to do that. But so I can see that we can't yet envision what we're going to be designing, but we won't be designing the same things that we're designing today. Much of that probably will be automated, some of the forms and things that we're doing today. But that's okay, because we'll be doing other things, right? Like it's an evolution of the discipline that we move, that some things automate and disappear and new things emerge, which we can't envision them because they aren't possible right now. But
right.
So I don't think we need to be afraid. I think we need to seize the moment and take responsibility for where the technology goes, because we are a big part of speaking for humans. But I don't think we need to, like hide in the closet and worry that our industry is going to disappear.
Right. The question really is, if you go back to the 70s or even 80s before desktop publishing, there were schools that would train people in draft, in typesetting, in all these things. These jobs are all gone, right? So is UX the typesetting of the 80s? And we're just basically getting it to become more of a data science engineering degree? Or do we feel that there is a future where UX design can still be what it is somewhat now? Or do we have to completely revamp the curriculum to be much more science focused or much more data focused or much more back-end focused?
I think that designers, that UXers are becoming much more data literate. And I think that will continue. But I also think that as we enter a period in which we are really determining the future of these AI systems, that humanities come back, are kind of coming back front and center, psychology, sociology, philosophy, for really understanding these systems and building systems for people. So I don't think that UX is going to become this super hard science developer in the future. I think it will. I think our methods will change because as the technology changes, but our methods have changed, right? We don't use the same methods as we used, a couple of decades ago. Our methods have evolved, and they will continue to evolve quickly, probably. So we'll be using different methods, but I don't think they'll all be hard science methods. I think the more qualitative humanities, social science side of things will actually become more important rather than less important.
I actually have a question on that topic. It was not in the list, but I'm very curious about your position on kind of design ethics and the fact that the last decade we've seen the importance of chief privacy officers and kind of privacy establishing itself as a relevant C-suite discipline. How do you see the kind of design ethics in the future, and in which form almost?
So I'm a big fan of Ruman Chowdhury, who is a design ethicist and who has led a lot of great initiatives in the last few years. And she talks about, she's a big advocate for social science. And she talks a lot about the amount of knowledge that is already out there in the social sciences that we could be tapping into to take on complex questions around data ethics. But in the past, there's been a big divide between the social science world and the technology world, and that the two have to come together if we're going to take on these issues. And if they can come together, there's a lot of hope for the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, from an institutional university perspective, that is definitely happening in universities right now. Mm-hmm. It's like every day another AI center is opening that's bringing together humanities and sciences to take on these hard questions around AI. So in some ways, AI is becoming a focal point that is bringing disciplines together and breaking down some silos that have been very rigid in past generations.
How do you see these, I would call them think tanks, or AI-centered policy centers driving societal policy for the future? Is there a discord around that?
Well, there's definitely a discord around that in government right now, right? Those centers certainly feeding government policy. I don't think things can be completely, government isn't going to be able to do it all, right? It's got to be industry-led as well. So we need to see the same kind of energy around AI ethics happening in industry. I will say, I feel like there's been a bit of a lull on the industry side. Like the government side, it's like taken off and done amazing things, but there's been a bit of a lull on the industry side. And the industry side has to come back and be a part of this, or we're never going to succeed. So
I feel there's a overhyped gold rush right now, where it's really a massive land grab on the technology side with very few considerations, take no prisoners kind of approaches to capturing these markets, which worries me a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah, scary.
One more question related to that, actually. How do we help companies collaborate on the data? Because right now we know that everybody being on the same data model is difficult. And we also know that you can't have every pharmaceutical company develop their own large language model. So do you have any thoughts on how do we develop kind of foundational data sets that are safe, protected, etc.?
That in some ways is more of a data science question in my mind, but there's a lot of interesting work being done around that in the data science world. I mean, on one answer to that question is that you go to open source foundational models and you take those foundational models and then you use those to build your personal models rather than going to the industry owned big large language models in which, you know, supposedly you can build privacy guardrails, et cetera, but that's very controversial that that's even possible. Although of course some people are doing it. And then there's a whole nother movement for creating smaller models that can be more easily secured and more easily created. Beyond, I mean, there's so many, there are a lot of arguments out there in data science right now about how to take on that question. How do you, and it speaks to bias too, right? It's like, how do you secure those models? How do you control bias in those models? How do you protect individuals' personal data within, I mean, there's all these questions, and I don't want to suggest that I'm like putting it off on data science, but I do think it is a huge challenge in that industry right now. And that's where the real expertise, I feel like, comes in for different strategies there.
Thank you so much for your insights.